joining us for today's webinar. My name is Joanne Paano, and on behalf of the National Network for Youth, we are so delighted and excited to welcome our two guests today, Roman Sandhu of Action Ohio and Ruth White of the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. A few housekeeping items before we get things started. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards. We will be reserving time for questions and answers for folks towards the end of today's presentation. So if you have any points of clarification or questions that you raised with our experts today, please do so by using the question box at the right side of your screen. We will be checking both the question and chat box periodically. Moving on to our agenda, we'll go ahead and kick things off with introductions of our guest presenters. We'll then share how youth leaders wrote and delivered the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative to willing partners at HUD. We'll transition and discuss how to set up partnerships and use the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative to close gaps through which youth fall into homelessness. And lastly, we'll then be moving towards questions and answers for our webinar. Beginning with introductions, so delighted to welcome Roman Sandhu. Roman is a former foster youth and statewide officer of the Overcoming Hurdles in Ohio Youth Advisory Board. The board exists to be the statewide voice of disconnected youth ages 14 through 24. In his role as treasurer, Roman traveled to DC in 2018 to accept the Angels in Adoption Award on behalf of the Ohio YAB as per Senator Rob Portman's nomination. Roman returned to Washington, D.C. in March 2019 to meet directly with Secretary Carson and his leadership team at HUD to present the recommendation Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Coalition. Roman led the follow-up meeting with the Deputy Assistant Secretaries to then discuss the details of the proposal. Roman currently works full-time and will begin his freshman year at Findlay University in Ohio later this month. Thank you, Roman. Ruth Ann White is the co-founder and executive director of the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare and former director of Housing and Homelessness for the Child Welfare League of America. At the Child Welfare League, she co-edited the landmark issue of the League's journal, Child Welfare, documenting the extent to which children are needlessly held in foster care because their parents lack decent housing. Prior to working at LA, managed the Front Door Family Shelter and redesigned the homeless coordinated entry system in Columbus, Ohio, reducing shelter entries by over 60%. Ruth is also certified as a housing manager. She has a Master's of Science Administration from Case Western Reserve University and a Bachelor of Science degree in Social Work from Ohio State. She is currently a Berkeley Scholar, doctoral candidate, professor of social work at Catholic University of America. Thank you again so much, and Roman, for joining us today as guest presenter.
Thank you.
And turn it over to Roman.
All right. In this picture here, we actually have Tatiana, Kiera, and Tajane. I believe that's actually me in the background signing in. We were at about to meet with Secretary Carson and his team. But FYI, it actually emerged from the FSHO Coalition. The Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Coalition, led by Action Ohio, includes more than 55,000 foster care alumni and allies. The coalition works in partnership with the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. We've been meeting regularly to identify and eliminate synchronization flaws within the system. I'm sorry about that. It should. Sorry about that. Trying to get it to move it to my Sorry about that. I am so sorry. Here must have frozen. It's not moving.
Joanne can probably advance them for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say if that'd be helpful. I'd appreciate it because I can't. It's not letting me.
There we go.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So in this top picture, we have Joyce Beatty, and in the bottom we actually have Curtis. Joyce Beatty's from Columbus. Forgive me for that. Curtis is a 15-year-old. He was actually lobbying on the Hill. He came out of a group home to go and lobby in DC for us. The visits to DC included research about regulatory authority and legislation. In 2016, working in partnership with Foster Youth Champions, Representative Turner and Representative Bass, the Full Coalition developed a plan to synchronize existing programs such as HUD's Family Reunification program and with a young person's emancipation from foster care, and to assure that the vouchers are available to all youth leaving care who are at risk of homelessness, regardless of where they live. Over the years, the appropriators too particularly FUP champions Senator Collins and Senator Murray have been actively engaged in discussions about how to improve access to FUP and other economic supports for foster youth and young people who experience homelessness. It was the summer of 2018 when we had discovered that much of what was needed to be done existed within HUD's regulatory authority. So we decided to write up the plan and deliver it to Secretary Carson. So advance that slide for me. I don't know if this will let me do it. There we go. All right, so in the picture on the left, we actually have the people that we had met with at HUD, consisting of Danielle Bastarash, Becky Primo, Ryan Jones, Steve Dunham, Michelle Davis, Mindy Alt, and Todd Richardson, who was actually a foster parent. We also had Kimberly Colonel on my right, who is a representative from the California Youth Connection, and on my left we had Michael Outrich, who is a fellow alum, and we also had some of the partner agencies represented, such as iFoster and Casey Family Programs, as well as the Children's Defense Club and their fund and Foster Club. Sorry about that. But in February, the Fashel Coalition requested a meeting with Secretary Carson with the assistance of Assistant Secretary Seth Appleton, who helped to extend vouchers for youth from 18 months to 3 years through HOTMA in 2016, while Chief of Staff for Representative Lukemeyer. On March 4th, 2019, the Fashel Coalition had met with Secretary Ben Carson and his leadership team at HUD. We were invited back 2 days later to meet with the leaders and staff at HUD to outline the details of the plan. And I will say that going to that meeting, I was very nervous, almost shaken, just from the thought of how big the meeting was going to be. And when we had gotten there, HUD actually made it to where it just felt like just a general conversation, just back and forth between people. It was a very relaxed atmosphere, and we were deeply grateful for that. There we go. Oh, sorry about that. Go back. Sorry about that. There we go. A week later, on July 26th, Secretary Carson traveled to Milwaukee to meet directly with youth fellows at Journey House, a community action agency, to announce FYI. FYI extends FUP to all non-FUP housing authorities that administer vouchers and makes FUP vouchers available on demand via HUD's tenant protection account, for which FUP is an original eligible use. And on the far left of the picture, we can actually see Jim O'Callahan from Action Ohio at the round table. So, let's see. Maybe? There we go. Okay. So how FYI works on the ground. Basically, an independent living coordinator and young person file FYI paperwork with a public housing authority about 3 to 6 months prior to leaving care. PHA will request TBV from HUD. Then HUD dispenses the funds on demand, and the PHA administers the subsidy to the landlord for 36 months. ECWA funds can be contracted out, landlord recruitment and positive youth development services for 36 months. This is also actually conducted without further disadvantaging waiting list households. For people that are on that list already, this wouldn't put them any further or further up or further down on the list. This would just keep everybody where they are at the moment, but this would be just in a separate section of it. Let's see if I can do it. There we go. So, that. So as you move along this process, each partner's role will ebb and flow. This can and should be sorted out in the MOU or the letter of letter of agreement. For example, for obvious reasons, the PCWAs will handle the majority of step 1 transition planning. And for me, however, with my housing, I'm actually in my dormitory now for the University of Findlay. I didn't need any of these vouchers for myself. I had a housing transition plan and whatnot already in place, so I didn't need any of the vouchers for myself, which I really am deeply grateful to the University of Findlay for that. But before I had emancipated, I had gotten set up with summer housing for the University of Findlay, and then now recently moved into the dorms about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I personally didn't actually end up needing these vouchers. So not all foster youth that emancipate will actually have to have these for themselves, but some will. So I will actually, sorry about that. Shoot, is that? Sorry. So how do communities set up the necessary partnerships? I'll actually hand this off to Ruthie, so she can get that explained.
Thank you, Roman. So I'm Ruthie with the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. And now you all know what I know, and that is the young people that have been visiting DC trying to close these gaps in systems for the better part of 6 years are not only qualified to provide ideas for reform of the child welfare system, but they spent so much time over the last few years studying regulations, studying the law, studying various funding sources that they are now subject matter experts on housing, child welfare, homelessness, and I think they would give some CRS employees a run for their money as well. So I'm really grateful that Roman was able to take some time out of his busy schedule. As you can see, he just recently moved into the dorm. When do you start classes? Next week?
Next week on the 19th.
Yeah, so I mean, you have a lot going on. So the fact that you would be generous enough to help us all understand this, I'm really, really grateful. So let's, thank you. I control the slides, okay. So I feel like folks on this call are curious about how they would approach setting up an FYI partnership in their community. And so I'll take some time to go through sort of a 3-step process as to how you would do that. And I want to clarify from the outset that HUD did issue a notice on July 26th. There's links throughout this presentation on that. HUD's done a great job of marketing it, and they're still doing these rollouts across the country. We're so excited about HUD's sense of urgency here. Roman mentioned the folks who made this happen. I mean, the fact that Ryan Jones, Becky Primo, and Daniel Bastarash fully embraced this and were able to put it on paper and get it in through the Office of General Counsel within 4 months is really extraordinary. I think perhaps unprecedented in federal policy, absent something like a natural disaster. So I think that's a testament to their willingness to listen to the youth. The fact that the young people did share their stories, they were quite moving. And so we're, HUD's sense of urgency is palpable. But it appears to folks that they've hemmed in the notice considerably because it's aimed, the FYI notice is an invitation to only public housing authorities that do not currently administer the Family Unification Program. But I just want to emphasize the math that's involved with that and the fact that that essentially means they have given universal access or the opportunity for universal access nationwide. So only about 13% of public housing authorities have administered the Family Unification Program in the past or are currently administering it. So that means, if I'm doing the math right, about 87% of housing authorities are eligible to create a partnership through FYI. Housing authorities also have to be involved in ACC contracts with HUD. So they have to also be administering the Housing Choice Voucher Program. That's not going to be the case for every housing authority. We can help you sort that out. HUD, as I said, is a very willing partner here. They've got lots of materials on their website. But step one is to figure out where the nearest non-FUP housing authority is, because they're the eligible applicants here. So if you click this link, you'll get something that looks like this, and you can see if your public housing authority is on it. If your local public housing authority is on it, they're not eligible for FYI because they're already administering the Family Reunification Program. But that is step one. If they're not on this list, you can start to reach out. But I also want to emphasize, HUD left a lot of wiggle room in the notice. So there are ways to partner with a neighboring housing authority that doesn't have FUP vouchers available to serve your youth. And so we'd also be happy to help you navigate that. The National Center for Housing and Child Welfare does not charge for our technical assistance, primarily because we want people to have answers to these questions. Continuum of care folks, housing authority folks, child welfare, all those partners. So we can help walk you through this, but be that as it may, this is step one. So step two is making that initial call or sending a letter to your public housing authority. You may hit the jackpot. You may have a housing authority that's already read this material from HUD. They may have heard from their trade association, CLAFA or FADA, NARO, those entities. HUD may actually have already reached out to them about doing a kickoff event. They're doing kickoff events, I believe, in all 10 federal regions. So they may be already on board and they just need you to sign the MOU or sign a letter. If that's not the case, then some education might be required. So we put together a draft letter. This letter has already been used in Maryland, and the meeting was yesterday, and the partnership is formed. So there's a method that you can follow to get these partnerships in place. So if you are going to meet with your housing authority, it would be helpful to print out a copy of the FYI notice from HUD because it's in HUD language, and look at that yourself. There's a link here. We've also put it in the handout section, and it's available on our website, nchcw.com, and I believe fosteractionohio.org has also put a link on their website. So that's step two. Step three is, if it turns out that you have willing partners, there's also some ways to create a willing partner, so reach out if you'd like that information. But assume that you have a willing partner. Step three is, now HUD requires, and FUP is unusual in this regard, they require the federal partners to sign on the dotted line prior to getting vouchers, which is kind of magical because for the Family Reunification Program, that means for that program, even if they're not successful in getting vouchers, the Housing Authority and the Child Welfare Agency have already begun to develop a relationship. That can be as lucrative as anything else, really. So there's a letter of agreement or an MOU that's required. If your organization, if your housing authority has applied for FUP in the past and was unsuccessful in getting those vouchers, they probably have an MOU lying around. But HUD also has on their website sample fillable MOUs that you could use for this purpose. But a letter of agreement will do it, and HUD prescribes in the notice exactly what each partner has to agree to. So it also is a bit of a cut and paste. And what you'll find, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, it's really aimed at the child welfare partners and their continuum of care folks. It's aimed at them because you want the young people to be prepared to be successful to the extent that that's possible with a voucher, because we are talking about having young people with leases in their name that is a legal contract. But we also want it to be a platform for self-sufficiency. So HUD wants to ensure, and the housing authorities want to ensure, that the child welfare partners involved are using an appropriate amount of their resources to support youth. That's always been the case for FUP for youth. And as we'll show you, it is essentially a cut and paste from Chafee. We're assuming that child welfare would use Chafee funds to support these youth. moving on to step 4, slowly but surely. Joanne, I don't know if I have control of the slide. There we go. So step 4 is now you're in a position where you have to set up the cross-system partnership. So again, this FYI program is based on the Family Unification program. There are partnerships like this all over the country, and we're actually doing a series of webinars where we have the partners come in and describe how this all works so that you can be assured that you're not staring off into the abyss. The Family Unification program is a 30-year-old program. Yesterday, we had the Prince George's County Housing Authority and the Continuum of Care lead, actually, because the Continuum of Care is co-housed with child welfare in a jurisdiction like Prince George's County. So that makes for a very elegantly simple chart. So this describes what the different roles are in a kind of a graphic depiction. You'd also want to sort this out in your MOU. And so you'll notice that the letter of agreement is going to be between the PCWA, again using HUD language, Public Child Welfare Agency, and the local or state public housing authority. However, HUD encourages these community level partnerships to include the continuum of care because from time to time, child welfare, whatever plan was put into place, it fails, or child welfare didn't put a robust plan into place, and young people who age out of foster care end up homeless at which is why we're here today at extraordinary rates. And FYI is a recipe to prevent that from happening, but that's going to be a process. Today, there are young people who aged out of foster care who are in the shelter system or who are have already been identified by coordinated entry. Those young people need to be informed of their eligibility for FYI, and I'll go over specifically what the eligibility is. And the Child Welfare Agency must be notified, and they essentially have to make a referral. But I don't like to use that language because I think we really need to think about this as a partnership where folks are trying to prevent and reduce homelessness. And certainly, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness has done an extraordinary job of pulling partnerships like this together all over the country. So none of us are starting from scratch. Thank you. So Roman mentioned he had kind of the 4-step process of transitioning, transition planning. This is a lengthier document. We have in your handouts, there's a copy of this. This is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So what the young people that have come year after year were really trying to design was a system that eliminated gaps, synchronized existing resources, and capitalized on the predictable nature of homelessness for youth aging out of foster care. So the National Network for Youth was kind enough to let me do a guest blog the other day. And so in that guest blog, I quoted Congressman Michael Turner, who met with the young people in 2016, and his reaction was, this is government-created homelessness. It's entirely predictable what's happening here. We know the day that these young people are going to turn 18 or 21, whatever the case may be. The court is aware of that date. The young person is aware of that date. So please, can we plan around that date? And so he gave all of us our marching orders, and certainly Dan Hare, his staff person, has been, I think, in weekly contact with Action Ohio on trying to sort this all out. I also want to say that as this has evolved, the entire Financial Services Committee has been a really important player, and Maxine Waters' Financial Services staff has been instrumental in kind of making this all make sense. And of course, California Youth Connection, meeting directly with that staff was helpful because the model that California has in place in terms of how young people age out with housing stability looks a lot like what we have in this chart. So I'll just say a few words about this chart. Young people who are disconnected from their families can often be reconnected to their families. So the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, for example, those programs do incredible work in terms of repairing families, family reunification, counseling, soft services, things of that nature, to help children return home. And in fact, most children who enter the foster care system, they do exit to reunification. So I should also mention that my organization, the other half of our mission is to ensure that no family ever loses their child to foster care as a consequence of their parents' inability to afford safe, decent housing. So I really admire the work that folks do to prevent families from losing their children, but also reunification. And I think runaway and homeless youth funded programs don't get nearly the credit that they should for all the family reunification work that they do. Now, for the young people where it becomes abundantly clear that they cannot return home, they would be in one of these placements in this, to the far left of this graph. They would be in foster care, kinship care, group home. Perhaps they're on the street, but as we all know, doing street outreach, we're trying to not let young people linger on the street, especially when their foster care is a government entitlement. So they might be in a TLP, they might be in some other program. And then I also want to acknowledge that young people who are in child welfare and the juvenile justice system are eligible for that, for this program. And again, I'll go over eligibility in a few slides, but what we're really aiming for here is that if it is the case that a young person is going to be independent when they age out, by the age of 18, we should be thinking about giving them an opportunity to practice being a householder, to practice being a renter. And there are programs all over the country funded by Title IV-E, which is the federal line item under the Social Security Act that funds child welfare, that put young people in their own apartments. It's extremely flexible, and the ACYF guidance on how funding can be used for extended foster care is about as broad as we could have ever hoped for them to make it. I don't have a link to that, but I can certainly provide it. It might be the case that a young person should continue to stay in foster care through the age of 21. They may go to a dorm, as is the case with Roman, but I think it's good for the housing partners in this equation to understand the enormous amount of money that is made available through a Title IV voluntary placement agreement that a young person would sign. It's important to note that most people don't know, certainly a lot of housing people don't know, a lot of advocates don't know, that in order for a young person to sign a voluntary placement act in any state in the union and have that state be reimbursed through federal money under the Fostering Connections to Success Act, they have to meet a work or a school requirement. So some of you may know that early on in the process of the youth creating Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act, it had what was tagged as a work requirement. The reason the youth had a work requirement is because extended foster care has a work requirement. Now, I would like to say that my organization is interested in investigating the merits of this work requirement, with folks on the RHYA side of the equation and other adult shelter programs, because this could possibly be a reason why young people who need to stay in foster care past the age of 18 are excluded because they can't meet this work requirement. But I've not found a sizable constituency beyond the Faux Show Coalition to advocate on that. But be that as it may, it has a work requirement. But Chafee Independent Living Assistance, which is the light blue box below that, doesn't have a work requirement, and there's a robust list of services in there. I'm often told that this line item is quite small, maybe it's 150 million or something. We'd also be interested in working with anyone who's interested in doubling or quadrupling that line item, but it is the case that that money is available, and the Administration for Children and Families has said that that's a nice match for FYI. So the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act extended Chafee Independent Living Assistance, thanks to Karen Bass. It extended those services through age 23. So that's, you can see this box goes through age 23. It's also important to point out that education and training vouchers through that legislation were also extended, and they were extended through age 26. So how fun is it going to be to sit down in communities across the United States and look at how we could entirely close the gaps through which young people fall into homelessness if we share all of this information and add a lot of transparency here for partners that could help us maximize these resources. So what we recommend, and by that I'm saying the Faux Show Coalition, what we recommend is you wouldn't necessarily want to refer a young person to FYI until closer to their 21st birthday. Now, eligibility-wise, you could send them to an FYI voucher at 18, but I just want to clarify, if you do that, they will have exhausted nearly all the federal resources that are available to them as a ward of the state. They will have exhausted that by 21. If you take the recommendation of the young people themselves, they're offering that you could provide a platform for economic self-sufficiency through the age of 25, and that's the low end. So it's also the case that young people who have aged out, who struggled because they were on their own, or maybe who got rapid rehousing, that we've actually eliminated the need to tap rapid rehousing because it's such a scarce resource. We've eliminated the need to use rapid rehousing. What we don't want to see is young people who age out, linger in homelessness, go through coordinated entry, tap into rapid rehousing, aren't successful with rapid rehousing, and then they hit this, then a referral is made. We could have eliminated that struggle, that lack of certainty that comes with rapid rehousing, and we could have eliminated all of that chaos and just done this. So, so rapid rehousing, we wouldn't recommend that be, but if that has been catastrophic for a young person, absolutely, you could refer them for FYI. And again, these conversations do need to happen. But this, using limited coordinated entry resources like rapid rehousing for a young person between the ages of 18 and 23 who's eligible, who would otherwise be eligible for this, is a supplantation. And we're trying to give you information with this chart that would prevent supplanting available HHS or community child welfare resources. So the presenters from Prince George's County, the Housing Authority of Prince George's County, were very clear about this green box that's under housing. They routinely provide young people with a family unification program voucher. They over time reduce the amount of, say, case management services they have, and they enroll young people in HUD's family self-sufficiency program. And they do that because they know that the resource is time limited. So, so that describes a little bit about that. I'll also return to that FSS FUP demo in a second, but they do a great job. In fact, Secretary Carson tweeted out a video of a story. It's just a 1-minute long video about a young woman who lives in Prince George's County and is participating in FSS. And the video is beautiful, so there's a link on our website to it. But she does talk about how it was really the Housing Authority that told her about FSS and enrolled her. So all of this is to say, we can knit all this together. And the reason that we put this information in a timeline is because we're often asked, oh my God, but there's another cliff at 25, so we're just delaying homelessness. We don't think about it that way. We think about it this way. We've given ourselves nearly 10 years to plan for self-sufficiency, so everybody knows the rules of engagement. I also want to emphasize adding predictability into a young person's life about what is going to happen at age 20, 21, 25 is a huge gift, but it is also in line with trauma-informed care. You do have no locus of control if you don't understand what the future holds. And so the young people were very passionate about sharing and transparency and helping youth get a sense of the future. And part of what they need to understand is at age 26, the voucher is going to end, or at 5 years out, or 3 years out, or whatever. But that doesn't mean they have to be homeless. we have to be good partners here. If it becomes clear that a kid is not going to be self-sufficient, we've done all the assessments, they've had their own voucher, they're not going to be able to fly on their own at age 25. If we work more closely with the CPD side of HUD or the SNAP office, we could say, you know, tamp down some of your targeting and let me do this. I learned that this kid is not going to be self-sufficient. I know that by age 23. Can we get a permanent supportive housing provider in our community notified that in 3 years, we are going to need a permanent supportive housing unit on the south side of Detroit? They have 3 years notice to do that. Currently, you can't do that because it's a very harried process of prioritizing. This would be kind of a diversion type of prioritizing where we could actually do it 2 or 3 years in advance. But most of the young people that are going to be in the FYI program are going to be young people that are going to be self-sufficient. And this is a platform for that. But these are, we also offer some other suggestions for what could happen after the voucher. And these wouldn't be unfamiliar to any young person in the US today. I mean, maybe you have a roommate, shared housing, something like that. But we're aiming for private apartments and a platform for self-sufficiency. And we're grateful that Secretary Carson embraced that. So Joanne, next slide. Okay, so I know the slide is very tiny. The font is very tiny. I violated a lot of PowerPoint rules here, but we just wanted to emphasize something pretty important about the FYI services. So they're almost indistinguishable from the Chafee services, and here's why. It's by design. In the year 2000, when young people asked those of us at the Child Welfare League of America to add youth, ask Congress to add youth as an eligible population to the Family Unification Program, Robin Nixon, who was the Positive Youth Development Director at CWLA at the time, said, you cannot just start handing out vouchers without some kind of services. And guess what? Child welfare already has a line item for that called the Chafee Independent Living Program. So let's just cut and paste Chafee and put it into FUP. So what you see here is the juxtaposition of these two, and those links will take you to these sources where we pulled this information. But the FYI notice is actually a little more. I like how they spin it because it's a little more specific. Like you can't just do housing services; you need to do landlord recruitment. Housing services means security deposits because housing authorities don't pay security deposits. So HUD did a lot of extra work for us here, and I'm grateful to them. Be that as it may, there's a funding source for this. Could we increase it? Sure, but it was a cut and paste by design, and I'm grateful to Robin Nixon and her infinite wisdom for figuring out this should exist in federal law. Next slide. So who is eligible? FYI, again, is FUP. It does not change FUP eligibility. This is for any young person who was in foster care at any point after their 16th birthday, who is between the ages of 18 and 24. And again, much appreciation to HUD because they don't interpret 24 as 24th birthday. You have an extra year to refer someone to this program. And I myself have done this. I've taken HUD up on this offer. And there's actually a 22-year-old who's about to get a voucher here in Maryland. But just know that this is a very important fact to have in your back pocket, certainly if you're doing coordinated entry and work with the COC. Now, we'd like to minimize the amount of young people who, we failed as a society and they become homeless at 25 and we have to refer them. And I would, we're going to urge HUD's research arm, policy development and research, to kind of track what the referral age looks like over the years, because we'd like, the idea the youth had here was to prevent homelessness and minimize the kids who experience homelessness at 23 or 24 who would need such a program, because they are participating in it, they participated in it since they were 21. So I think that the research is going to bear that evolution out. The young person would be 90 days out, and again, the youth child welfare people will recognize that 90 days of transition plan is required under the Fostering Connections to Success Act. That's why, again, HUD has done their homework here. So they will be leaving foster care within 90 days, or they are under the age of 25 and they are homeless or at risk of homelessness. HUD's definition here, we don't have any quibbles about HUD's definition of, because they include at risk of homelessness. That could mean your CELA subsidy is going to end, by the way. And this also captures young people who are parenting, but I want to offer you that, again, Prince George's County is not alone. Some child welfare agencies and their housing authority partners decide if a young woman is 22 with 2 children, she's probably working, she probably has child care, child welfare has worked on that stuff, but the idea that she would magically make enough money at the end of the voucher to support the gap between her income and what housing would cost for a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment is a little bit magical thinking. So what they do is they offer often young women a regular family unification program voucher or a regular voucher, and that's not time limited. And so it just gives her some room to breathe as a parent. Okay, I'm going to just talk about the future and then we can move on to questions. It's one of the few pictures I have that Roman is actually not in. So this is the Faux Show Coalition with Congressman Mike Turner. I want to point out, it's funny, they're all lined up. So the woman with me in the front, so in the blue, that's Lisa Dixon. She's kind of the mastermind behind all of this. Doris is right behind her. That's Doris Edelman. She has a 30-year career in child welfare services, independent living. She volunteers all of her time to help organize the trips and uses her own money to rent the vans, to bring the 15-passenger vans. Behind her is Jamal Callahan, AKA Mr. Motivator. He is an extraordinary speaker, planner, advocate, and he's really pushed this forward. He's done any number of trips to DC, and he's going to be doing a lot of training on this program, and he's going out to Orlando in the end of the month. So he's just fabulous. But it's really the 3 folks here in this picture lined up with Michael Turner that have carried the weight much on a volunteer basis in a lot of ways on this. So the young people had an idea that they worked out last year, and it is, so FYI is it's a giant step forward towards what their kind of ultimate goal is, and that is to take existing resources and turn them into fostering stable housing opportunities. So this is how it looks. There is a bill. A lot of hard work went into this bill. Like I said, the bipartisan group of the financial services staff, Mr. Duffy's staff, Mrs. Waters, of course, Dan Hare from Mr. Turner's office. It's been an incredible undertaking, but I think a lot of us realize we couldn't have come up with this idea without the youth, because we weren't even thinking about it, because we never stood at the intersection of childhood and adulthood alone trying to navigate all of this. So it took their wisdom, and then we all came together to figure this out. And I would like to say hats off to the youth, because a lot of criticism was levied upon this bill over the summer, and they didn't reject it. They took it in and they made a better package. So this package is pretty stellar. It's very straightforward, and I have the links here. That could be easier to read. But anyway, essentially, we're capitalizing on the predictable nature of youth homelessness upon emancipation. There's obvious system gaps. I'm not sure I ever thought they could be fixed, but because I was forced by the youth into a new intellectual space, we figured out how to fix them. So we've synchronized Title IV-E with FUP, and we've used the existing FUP FSS demo to add an extra 2 years. So these are the elements of the bill. The bill directs all public housing authorities to tap into either the tenant protection vouchers, or I also want to acknowledge the appropriation staff who took our recommendation along with our partners, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and put report language. The Family Reunification Program, because of youth advocacy, I want to say, actually was doubled this year in the appropriations bill. So the byproduct here is that families actually are going to be better off because of the youth advocacy. Some people think that this is pitting youth and families against each other. They're not. It doesn't. So it's a $40 million line item, but the financial, the appropriations staff actually put in the report language that those vouchers will be distributed on demand. So the appropriators, authorizers, HUD and HHS, and soon to come, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness are really partnering up very well on this, and it's because they're passionate about these young people. So it's FUD plus FSS, and I'll close by saying it's simple math. It's basically a 3-year voucher. If young people would like to participate voluntarily in a self-sufficiency program, they could extend that voucher to a total of 5. So it has been magical to watch the young people construct all of this. It's an honor to be associated with Roman in any capacity. And so I'm really grateful that folks dialed in for this. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joanne for questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruthie, and thank you so much, Roman, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today and with our viewers. The first question that came about was, where can folks access Ruthie's blog? The blog is available on our website at www.nn4y.org. And in addition to the materials and content that was shared today, we'll go ahead and be sure to also share a link to Ruthie's amazing blog post with you all. The next question that we have appears to be from a young person themselves. Ruthie, I know that you outlined so well the eligibility of young people themselves, but the question is, so where can folks find more information and how can they access the program directly?
So if you advance to the next slide, I can point a few of those resources out. So there's yours, the National Network for Youth. Foster Action Ohio, if you're a young person and you're interested in all of this advocacy and how it was put together and how to access this program, I'd highly encourage you to go to Foster Action Ohio. So then the next website is ours. That's the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. If you go there, you can download all of the materials that we use today. And then on the next slide, so if you go to the next slide, if you're a detailed person like Roman and you want to read the stuff yourself, the original source material about how you would actually be referred for this program, HUD's FYI notice is linked here, and the HUD FSS notice is also there. But you can also reach out to me or to Roman with questions as well.
Great. As a follow-up question to that as well, Ruthie, someone just asked, how long does the process itself take?
That question came up yesterday. So I think you said how long the process for housing takes?
Yes.
Okay. So if your housing authority, first of all, they can determine a young person's eligibility very quickly. So if you get the paperwork together and there's a method to that madness, like you probably try, child welfare agencies should be trained on how to help a young person gather that. That information goes to the housing authority. They can determine you're eligible right away. I would say to get your certificate, your voucher in hand to then go looking, that would take probably somewhere between 15 to 30 days. The key is once you find a unit, you're going to be able to sign a lease very quickly and the funding will be dispersed. You only have 120 days to find a unit. You can maybe take that up to 150 days, but think that as it may, say 30 days to get your contract in hand from the housing authority to start go looking. Once you do that, it depends on how long it takes you to look for housing. And no young person should be left to their own devices to find housing. But I also want to say no independent living coordinator should be left to their own devices. It's going to take community effort to do landlord recruitment, and we did a webinar on that yesterday.
Great. Our next question goes to the mutual exclusivity of this program. The person asks, is there an incentive / possibility that a FUP PHA decide not to continue participating and instead pursue FYI?
Yeah. But, well, here's the thing. I should have mentioned the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act. I think maybe I did say this, but it essentially conscripts every housing authority in the country to do this. I mean, that's what the youth were looking for. They were looking to eliminate this sort of like lottery-like nature of like where you live and what housing authority has a grant and whatever. So, but be that as it may, HUD locked this in for this FYI notice. You're either FUP, it's very binary. You either have a connection to FUP or you do not. So a housing authority wouldn't be able to, right now, wouldn't be able to stop doing FYI and just, I'm sorry, stop doing FUP and switch to FYI. But here's what we envision for the future. When the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act happens and it universalizes this, youth will be exclusively served through this on-demand process, perfectly synchronized with their emancipation. And that would free up all of the traditional family unification program vouchers for families. That would be a major shift in American social policy, and that's what we're aiming for.
Great. Our next question is there a breakdown of how Chafee money will be utilized to fund for HUD services?
Oh, Roman, you want to handle that one?
Wait, I'm sorry?
You're by case manager, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, so basically with the way it is, that just depends on how each state, each county, each, even I'm sure city would do that individually. Like for example, for me, I did it with my, I worked with my county with my independent living coordinator, as well as even just my caseworker to get this housing set up. But it just depends on how that individual state or city or county does that work per their own agency. But as for mine, I mean, I worked with mine. They came to the university with me to help me and get that stuff set up. So yeah.
So, and what we're aiming for we think FYI provides, or FOSHO provides an extraordinary opportunity to standardize that and create some transparency nationwide. So I hear from young people all the time. Matter of fact, Annie Casey Foundation pulled a wonderful meeting with their fellows together the other day, and that was the closing question was, how can we standardize the services and how Chafee is meted out across the country? So we think, because we've added all this predictability in here, we could do that. So I would encourage you to find out what your community is doing and push the envelope.
Great, and I think the next question goes back to some of the resources that you just shared, but the situation is coming out of Chicago, where someone just shared that Youth in Care who's been kicked out of the TLP program in Chicago. Friday, the young person has to be gone. Would that youth be eligible for this program, and what does he have to do to get access to it in Chicago?
Okay, I would say call me or email me, and we can work that out. But there's a similar situation here in Maryland, and the young person isn't eligible for Section 8. The Section 8 housing authorities have, whether we appreciate this or not, they have some non-negotiables, okay? And those non-negotiables are demanded by other people who live in public housing. So it really depends on why they're being kicked out of the TLP. But I said, here's an interesting thing. I said rapid rehousing isn't a good match for this. However, that sounds like the solution to this problem. You would do rapid rehousing, help the young person learn to be a householder, deal with whatever they got kicked out about, and then refer them for FYI. So I would love to case manage and kind of plan around that with whomever asked the question. So reach out.
Great. It looks like that is the last of the questions, and unless anyone else has any other questions or points of clarification that they wanted to go ahead and share through the chat box or the question box, we'll give folks a few seconds to do so. Again, and just sharing that we will be out the information and content that was shared today, including the link to Ruthie's blog that she was so generous to share with us on our website, and also any content and contact information for those of you who may have any other detailed questions that you'd like to provide for us. Seeing that there aren't any other questions, Roman, Ruthie, thank you both again so very much for your leadership, and we are so grateful for you both for sharing your time and expertise on this topic, and thank everyone who joined us today.